Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a long 4-month process, and if you don't notice, it's a great time for this day to come because I've pretty much lost my voice after the last 4 months, and I'm very proud of the team, joint finance team that I led on the Assembly side, both Republicans and Democrats, because I think we had a good working relationship. Obviously, we don't always agree on the policies, but as people, we learn to agree to disagree and do it in a respectful manner, and it's something I greatly appreciate. When we began the process, I identified 3 principles. My wife's you've heard me say, a public school teacher. We grew up learning the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, I identified 3 basic principles that I wanted to use to guide us as we developed our budget. And that's the 3 R's: restraint, reform, and reinvestment. Now, the governor gave us a good place to start. But as we went throughout the process, we had our agency briefings. We learned a little bit more about his budget. Our caucus had some concerns. There were 3 basic concerns we identified early on. That was, we wanted to increase the governor's tax cut to a larger number. We wanted to make a bigger impact on the taxpayers of Wisconsin. We wanted to put more money into their pockets. We also wanted to reduce the size of our government. Governor was requesting additional 710 employees. None of us ever ran on growing the size of government, so we wanted to make our effort to reduce that number. And we also wanted to reduce our reliance on borrowing. Those were things that our caucus identified early on and helped us as we built the budget throughout the process. So after the agency briefings, we went to public hearings. Had 4 of them throughout the state, pretty much all 4 corners regionally of the state of Wisconsin. And we began to hear from the public, began to hear their input. There were a few things that I'm going to identify that we heard over and over again. There's always, some things that kind of come out of the blue, but some consistent messages started coming up from the public. We heard from educators, we heard from parents, we heard from school board members that they wanted us to support the $150 per pupil increase per year. We also heard from them that they had concerns about the school choice program. They didn't believe in the report card. They didn't think it had been tested. They thought it needed more time, more development. They also had a concern about identifying any community or any school as a failing school because they believed it would do a disservice to their community and to their school districts. We also heard about child support from our partners in our effort at the county level. We heard that by putting in some additional money into the child support fund, that we could draw down some additional federal dollars. And as a conservative, I think they made a pretty good case about how the work that they do actually helps lessen reliance on government by establishing paternity in many cases and getting the moms or the dads to support their children. That's something that we on our side of the aisle, and I'm sure you would support as well. We also heard from domestic abuse folks about how there was no increase in the budget for domestic abuse assistance statewide. There were a couple of building programs the governor had identified, but there was no statewide increase in domestic abuse grants. That was something that kind of hit home to me right off the bat. My mom, having served for about 25 years of the Domestic Violence Center in Marinette, that's what she was doing when I was growing up. So that I identified that right away, but I'll tell you, throughout the process, one thing kind of happened that even brought it home even more so, was that when the director of the Marinette shelter, the one that my mom once ran, was allegedly, I say allegedly because the trial hasn't happened yet, but was allegedly murdered by her boyfriend. So that kind of underscored the need for us to continue to support domestic abuse initiatives throughout our state. We also heard about treatment alternatives, alternatives to incarceration. Once again, this is something that hits home. It's no secret, I've got a daughter who has struggled with drug abuse for several years. Matter of fact, I wasn't here last week because I was at her graduation from her program, and I'm proud of her and hopeful that she has the skills that she needs to fight this addiction. We also heard from UW students about how they're struggling to pay their tuition and about how they've seen 22% increase over the last 4 years on their tuition, and they're beginning their careers, their chosen career paths in debt. So at the end of those 4 different listening sessions, we came back, and something happened that really changed the process. Due to difficult decisions we had made in the past, our reestimates of revenue came in, and we saw a significant surplus. So at this point in time, we had some choices to make. The choices I think that we made were prudent and measured and balanced. We made an equal commitment to our K-12 education funding, and we made an equal commitment to increasing that tax cut that we had talked about, putting more dollars into people's pockets. The Olson-Ellis plan, the $150 per pupil per year that we had heard so much about, is a reality. The tax cut is now $670 million. That, included with the tax cuts that are phasing in this biennium, will bring the biennial tax cut to nearly $1 billion. We compromised on school choice. We went to 185% of the federal poverty level, consistent with free and reduced lunch, and we made it statewide. We additionally provided a tax deduction so all parents who choose private schools for their children will have an opportunity to deduct that tuition from their taxes. We also froze UW tuition to give those students some certainty over the next 2 years that they can begin their career knowing what their expenses at the UW systems are going to be. We also increased domestic abuse funding. $750,000 we added to that program per year. We also increased treatment alternatives by 150%. And additionally, we added $1 million in this biennium for drug courts to help in those areas that are oftentimes underserved, that doesn't have the infrastructure to provide support to those addictions. So what do we do from a restraint standpoint, one of those 3 R's? We're about ready to pass a fiscally conservative budget. One that cuts bonding, one that cuts the number of state employees. Rather than the 710 increase, we have a 17 reduction. As far as our overall spending, if you take out the 2 priorities that our state has, taking care of those who can't take care of themselves under our Medicaid program, a $751 million increase, and education for our schools, a $300 million increase. If you take those 2 priorities that folks from both sides of the aisle will agree are important to us, if you take those 2 out of our biennial budget, we'll actually see a decrease. For my fiscally conservative friends, we will actually see a decrease in GPR spending of $120 million in this budget. As far as what we do for reform, well, we reformed our unemployment insurance initiative in Wisconsin. We're actually making some significant changes to the program, but also providing certainty for job creators throughout the state so that assessment that's been looming over them for the last several years will be covered by the state of Wisconsin, so that rather than putting dollars into an assessment to pay down the debt, they can put those dollars towards creating jobs and putting more people back to work. So yes, we've seen restraint, yes, we've seen reform, and we've talked about over and over again the number of things that we've reinvested in the priorities of the state of Wisconsin. Now, I'm beginning this debate by talking about the things that we've done in this budget. I'm sure I'm going to hear from my friends on the other side of the aisle the things that we aren't doing, and some of those things might be true, some of those things might be false. But I'm sure, let's hope we have a spirited debate, an honest debate, one that respects the taxpayers of the state of Wisconsin and respects each other. Because at the end of the day, they want us to work together and provide a product that they can support as well. And I think from my perspective and the perspective of my colleagues, we've done that. In closing, I also want to thank the Fiscal Bureau, who we've worked with over the last 4 months, and a number of them are here off to the side. The support that they give us, the knowledge that they have about state government is unsurpassed. And if I could, I'd ask my colleagues to join me, not in giving me a round of applause, but giving the Fiscal Bureau a round of applause for all their work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.